I think we can start this afternoon's work. With thanks to our guests who have agreed to join us today in this hearing on the subject of the new directive on nuclear safety. For this afternoon's meeting, we have about 2 hours. And this is how we're going to organise that time. We will give a maximum of 10 minutes to each of the speakers. So that we'll have time for questions or comments by our members in attendance, and perhaps a first answer. So let's get started by giving the floor to Massimo Garriba from the European Commission. Please go ahead, sir.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you.
Madam President, honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, I will try to use the few minutes that we have at our disposal to explain to you why the European Commission has put forward a new directive on nuclear safety and what are the main issues that it covers. First of all, let me recall that following the nuclear accident in Fukushima, there were 2 mandates which were given to the European Commission and to the national regulators in Europe. One was to carry out what is commonly known as stress tests, and the second thing was to review and possibly revise the legal framework. On this second aspect, we received strong support by also this institution. The European Parliament in 2012 adopted a resolution on the stress tests in which it asked the Commission to come up with an ambitious proposal for the nuclear safety in the EU. What are the main areas of amendment of this directive? There are, I would say, 4 main issues that have to be underlined. And these 4 main issues are ones that come out also from the analysis that has been carried out by, for example, the Japanese authority on Fukushima, but also reflections which are currently shared in the international level. The first is to guarantee that national safety authority, when they regulate nuclear safety, they do it so independently from any other pressure. They have to take decisions which are based solely on technical grounds. The second is that if you want also to regain the public trust on the safe operation of nuclear installations, you have to guarantee that there is a high level of transparency and public involvement in which is regulated. The third is that in Europe we have the possibility of, through the work which has been done, let me say, in the past by now almost 20 years, by national regulators and the like, we can arrive at setting high-level safety objectives that can be shared by everybody. Setting high-level objectives means that you do not prescribe the way in which they can be achieved, but you set a common and shared level of ambition, which is fundamental in order to obtain high level of nuclear safety. The fourth element, which is absolutely essential, for ensuring that the objectives are actually attained by the operators of the nuclear power plants and of the other installations, we need to have a monitoring system, and we have seen on the experience of the stress tests that systems of peer reviews are particularly effective in highlighting shortcomings and in ensuring that appropriate technical suggestions are made to improve the situation. So let me show you maybe in graphical terms how does this look. You have safety objectives, which is the goal at which you are aiming. You have the transparency societal element, which is fundamental in order to involve the society, and you have the peer review that are there to monitor correctly how the environment works. All this makes sense, as I said, only if we have strong, independent, efficient, well-staffed national authorities that can actually carry out their job. In one of the questions that was asked for this hearing is how are the lessons of the stress tests being taken into the directive proposal. Let me recall that there were 4 main conclusions of the peer reviews from the stress tests. One which is concerned with guidance on the assessment of natural hazards. The second one which recommends to have a periodic safety review of the installations at least every 10 years in the EU. The third one which is concerned with ensuring containment integrity. And the fourth one which is as much as possible to work on the prevention on accidents and limitation of their consequences. In the Commission proposals, all these 4 elements are contained in the articles that go from 8A to Article 9. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is, I think, is what I want to say at this stage. I would like also to thank the rapporteur, Madame Jordan, for the work that she has done so far on this file, and also the shadow rapporteurs that at the last meeting here have expressed support for the proposal of the Commission. Thank you, Madam President.
Bene, grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Gariba. Let's continue with our scheduled speakers, and the next one is Jean-Paul Poncelet for his presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored and delighted to participate in this hearing on nuclear safety. Foratom is the trade organization representing the European nuclear industry. This industry generates 28% of the EU's electricity, and it contributes significantly to the community's low-carbon goals by producing 55% of its CO2-free electricity, and it employs around 800,000 people. Let me make it very clear, when it comes to nuclear, we cannot afford not to be excellent in terms of safety. And we are, as demonstrated by the peer review of the so-called stress test, which has confirmed that nuclear power plants in Europe are safe. Indeed, we have been operating nuclear plants for nearly 60 years with outstanding technical and economical performances. In particular, no accident with serious off-site consequences have ever occurred at a civil nuclear reactor facility operated by our members. No other electricity generating industry has such a good industrial safety record. However, complacency is not an option. The key to maintaining such a safety record is well known. At national level, a single, independent, powerful, well-staffed regulator. From the operators, a strong safety culture, no compromise on excellence, and continuous improvement by learning from experience and from research and development. And of course, an unquestionable commitment by operators to strictly abide by the rules set by the regulator in a spirit of transparency and cooperation. Nevertheless, a severe accident did occur in Japan, and, as stated in the preamble of the directive you are discussing, its analysis reveals institutional failures as well as technical issues. My Japanese counterpart, who, by the way, was a former operator of the plant, and some of his colleagues humbly acknowledged that their safety culture was not satisfactory. This failure in an advanced modern economy had huge worldwide consequences on the public, on the decision makers, and industry is deeply conscious that it has to learn from it. We welcome the efforts made by the EU to draw the right lessons from the Japanese accident and to avoid such an event ever occurring in Europe. The European nuclear industry reacted quickly and proactively through the safety reassessment process initiated at EU level in a transparent and cooperative way, and immediately started implementing the regulator's recommendations, spending between 50 and 200 million euro per reactor to this end. This shared effort currently translates into a proposal by the EC to update the Nuclear Safety Directive. We support the alignment of nuclear safety at EU level to the highest standards through enhanced cooperation between competent and independent national safety authorities. Let me, however, voice industry concern about the Safety Directive on the one hand and the European governance of nuclear safety on the other hand. The objectives set for nuclear installations in Europe must remain fully consistent with the objectives of WENRA, which mean the European nuclear regulators, and the International Atomic Energy Agency after the Japanese accident. In particular, we urge the European legislator to keep in line with international processes, which then cascade down to the EU and other regions. We must ensure consistency of any new legally binding instrument with the results of ongoing processes, for instance, the IAEA time schedule, technical terms, and terminology. We also consider that while we should seek continuous improvement to nuclear safety at both existing and future nuclear power plants, any EU piece of legislation needs to recognize the operational differences between existing and new reactor design, as well as other nuclear installations such as fuel cycle and waste management facilities. The other point is governance. Governance is key to achieving ambitious and legitimate nuclear safety objectives. Under the current institutional setup in Europe, the national regulators are exclusively responsible. This responsibility cannot be shared or diluted without risking undermining their authority and, consequently, the effectiveness and the credibility of the safety measures. Let me insist on the risk of confusion and even double jeopardy if more than one regulator is involved. Therefore, we strongly support current and future proposals contributing to more independence of and providing more competence to the regulators, which have to be credible, impartial, and effective. That's also why we consider that the new directive should take a goal-setting approach to strengthen the responsibility, the competence, and the independence of national regulators. This means that prospective technical provisions, especially if not applicable to all reactor design concepts, should be avoided in EU-wide legislation. In parallel, harmonization at various levels should be strongly promoted as part of the revision process. We consider that enhanced cooperation between national safety authorities is the best way to reach alignment of nuclear safety at EU level to the highest safety standards. We are ready and available to provide regulators with our feedback in terms of practical experience and implementation. Regular European topical peer reviews could contribute to achieving this goal. Many similar processes are already existing to scrutinize nuclear power plants. For instance, the WANO, the World Association of Nuclear Operators, holds peer reviews every 4 years, and the International Atomic Energy Agency makes OSART, Operational Safety Review Team, inspections. New initiatives from the regulators are welcome if they avoid expensive redundancy. New peer reviews that are clearly focused on a specific scope with added value for nuclear safety, defined by the safety authorities jointly and later shared, implemented and followed up by them, could be a very effective way to enhance harmonization of nuclear safety. Let me conclude. I am used to refer to a question raised long ago in a seminar already dedicated to nuclear safety, and the question was, how safe is safe enough? Meaning that we can always do more, but ultimately there is a balance to strike, taking into account the additional benefits to society. A Fukushima-type event occurring in Europe is very unlikely, and the chance will be even smaller with the added measures being implemented, for instance, the WENRA request for new nuclear power plants that accidents with core melt, which would lead to early, large releases, have to be practically eliminated. How safe is safe enough? Finally, it's up to you to bring the answer. Indeed, society has to make the decisions. This is your responsibility, not the industries or the engineers. We appreciate that you consider our contribution to this discussion, and we are available for further exchanges. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Walter Ambriosini. Sorry, it's misspelled here.
Mrs. President, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Walter Ambrosini. I'm President of the European Nuclear Education Network since 1 year. So actually my focus is on education and training. And let's say I could summarize my presentation by saying that without education and training it is quite difficult to keep the level of safety. And so that's why it is a priority, as I'm saying in, let's say, in the first slide. So a few words about the ENEN Association. We are a non-profit organization which was established under the French law 10 years ago. I am so inheriting, without too much merit, I must say, a lot of success which have been obtained in the past years. And what is the mission of ENEN is to preserve and further develop the culture in education and training, let's say, in the nuclear field. And this is made by the promotion of networking, contacts between students and teachers, favoring borderless mobility, providing attractiveness for the young best student. This is a challenging task, actually, which is very much easier in periods in which the nuclear is very much attractive on the job market, and leading relevant European Union projects like Euratom fission training schemes. Actually, one of the aims of the association is to constitute a bridge between academia and the stakeholders industry in order to, let's say, prepare the professional figures which are actually important in industry. At the moment, there is a high consistency of the association, 64 members. I just finished on ENEN, just saying that later we got a recognition back in 2008 by the European Council, who recognized our existence and actually praised the work that was done at the time by my predecessors. And now we are also going, let's say, abroad with respect to European Union with practical arrangements with IAEA and its networks. What are the present needs for education and training? I'm taking a sentence from a report which has been published by Eron recently, which say that hardly, let's say, the present production of people can cover the needs which are in the industry, in the medical sector, and so on. And a worry observation is actually that by 2020, nearly 50% of nuclear experts, which are nowadays available, will retire, which means that we have very strict times to have a very important knowledge management operation, which is to transfer the knowledge from those who built and operated the plants for so many years to the young generation that have to continue this, in this endeavor. So what is the need to maintain education and training in the nuclear field in European countries? There is the risk to decrease competitiveness. It is not the case in these times. We are producing 28% of electricity in the European Union by nuclear energy. We need personnel for new designs of new plants, operation, research, decommissioning, let's not forget this, waste disposal, from power and medical application of nuclear energy. We must not forget that, let's say, some part of the waste is coming from the, let's say, hospital uses of, let's say, radioactive material. Nuclear safety culture is so an emergency in some sense, in the sense that it must be properly nurtured at the university level when you are at the desk, let's say on the desk, and industry stages. It is something like an industry concern, but it is necessary to start with, let's say, good education, let's say, in order to achieve it. What is nuclear safety culture? There are different definitions which I, let's say, indicate in this slide. Let me read the one which is coming from the industrial side, which is IMPO, and it is, let's say, remarkable because it is coming from an industrial side. The core values and behavior which are resulting from a collective commitment by leaders and individuals to emphasize safety over competing goals to ensure protection of people and the environment. So it means it is the most important subject. It must be the most important subject. I would say that considering that there is interconnection in the electrical grids in Europe, there is the potential for borderless impact of a nuclear accident. There is no, let's say, no need to demonstrate that. There is the present objective of borderless mobility for education and training, which our young people actually try to achieve, actually. A lot of young students are going forth and back in Europe. It is reasonable to conceive that the promotion of education, training, and research in the nuclear field is a sort of inescapable cross-border commitment not to be discontinued in any European country, no matter its sovereign decision in relation to the energy mix. The energy mix may not include nuclear, but it must include education on nuclear, because you have any way to deal with nuclear for medical applications or whatever. So supporting education training in the nuclear field is necessary to assure nuclear safety throughout Europe and beyond. Coming to nuclear safety culture, I already have, let's say, said one of the definitions, but let me say something more. Still in an IMPO report, it is written that nuclear safety is a collective responsibility. It's not just individual. The concept of nuclear safety culture applies to every employee in the nuclear organization, from the board of directors to the individual contributor. No one in the organization is exempt from the obligation to ensure safety first. And the report is interesting because, and I suggest the reading of that, because it makes also categorization about, let's say, what are the traits of a nuclear safety culture. There is the individual commitment that must become first. everyone, from the management through let's say, to the simple operators, let's say, must be committed and be personally accountable for nuclear safety, have a questioning attitude, which means ask every time if what I'm doing it's the right thing. Effective safety communication. If something happens which is not in, let's say, in the bounds of good safety practice, it must be communicated and the feedback must come. Then there is another stress on management commitment to safety, which brings the leadership role as an important one, because the leadership, from, let's say, from top down in this sense, not only from bottom up, nuclear safety culture is made, because, let's say, the management must have this attitude to favor nuclear safety over any other competing objectives. Then a management system must be there in order to be sure that there is a continuous learning, there is a problem identification and resolution, there is an environment in which concerns about safety can be raised. So all of these can be obtained by appropriate education and training, which is necessary to acquire knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are needed in this frame. What is the NuShare project? It is a project that the European Nuclear Education Network Association is leading as a grant, let's say, to a named beneficiary. And it is actually in response to, let's say, some request from initiative from the cabinets of Commissioner for Research and Innovation and Energy after Fukushima, in order to, let's say, set up training courses for different target groups, aiming at enhancing the present level of safety culture throughout Europe and abroad. There are different target groups. The first one, which is very challenging because it is related to policy decision makers and opinion leaders at the level of national and regional governments, and people who is also, let's say, involved in, let's say, radiation emergencies and medical sector people also, which is very much important to educate to safety principle. Target group 2 is a little bit more, let's say, I don't want to say routine, but it is, let's say, something which is very much important, but more in a normal field. It is nuclear regulators, regulatory authority, and technical safety organization. We think, of course, to the young people entering this organization. And the third group is the group of industry, which is in particular electrical utilities and so on. Again, the young people must be trained to this new concept. After university, of course, the NuShare project has 2 phases. You can see the website and you can take information on that. The first phase is the preparation of the project, actually, which will last 16 months. And will terminate with a catalog of courses that should be delivered in the second phase, which is estimated for a duration of 3 years and will include pilot courses and also, let's say, actual course delivery. We have an important event, which is now, let's say, in a short time, which is the stakeholders meeting, will be held here in Brussels. In that frame, we will, let's say, try to have people entering the project in order to offer courses and so on. So let me say that the NuShare project is a service to European citizens. We responded to a call in some sense, and the ENEN accepted to undertake this highly visible and critical endeavor in view of the benefits that can be created to the European Union. I come to recommendations and I close. Let me say that the worries motivating the creation of ENEN 10 years ago, which is the threat to competitiveness of the European Union in the nuclear energy field, are still there. In the post-Fukushima, even more worrying in some sense. Then there are strong motivation to ask all the European countries not to discontinue but to enhance education and training efforts in the nuclear field. We'd like, I must say, the stress on this point in the amended Article 7, but maybe we should even stress more. Efforts like the one of the European Nuclear Education Network to harmonize and obtain mutual recognition of competencies acquired in the nuclear field should be accompanied also by provisions to overcome the regulatory barriers that make actually the circulation of professionals and students and so on difficult throughout Europe. And there are, let's say, still some barriers in that sense. The stability of policies, this is another thing which I want to stress, actually is at the EU level at least, but I would say in the different countries in relation to energy, is necessary to develop harmonized and durable education and training schemes aiming at improving safety. So we must take decisions which are long-sighted and durable. Specific means should be established to ease and support the mobility of students and trainees in the nuclear field. This is our message. So here you can find, let's say, our web page, and this is also the leaflet of our event of the NUSHARE stakeholders meeting. Thank you.
Grazie Walter Ambrosini.
Thank you very much indeed. Now then, we're going to move on to our next speaker, please. Jan Avokan.
Okay.
This is you.
No, it's not. It's a colleague.
It's a colleague.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, for giving me the possibility to speak. It's not on?
Now it is.
Thank you. So, thank you for inviting me, giving me the floor to speak. My name is Patricia Lorenz. I work for Friends of the Earth Europe in the field of nuclear energy for, I'm afraid, it's 30 decades by now. So I'm speaking here on behalf of civil society, also simply the people who are out there who are wondering what's happening with nuclear safety. I was asked in the program to speak on transparency, but I allow myself simply to already start a kind of discussion by reflecting, because I think we heard already quite a broad spectrum of opinions. And now that we are thinking about, actually in the end, this revised nuclear safety directive is to be seen as a result of the stress tests, which are a result of Fukushima. So we should see that were lessons learned, or is pre- and post-Fukushima anyway the same. So we heard mainly from Monsieur Poncelet from Foratom how he sees the situation, that Europe is excellent in nuclear safety, and that this was confirmed by the stress tests. I don't want to start a stress test situation, but I think that not the lessons learned were even in the stress tests. So I think that the safety philosophy is wrong, that there has to be less probability, that all the things that always were excluded are still excluded. Things like this cannot happen at once, although we saw it can happen at once. Don't want to open this whole box. Where also transparency could have been an answer, where next to what still obviously seems the plan to rely on, I heard mainly WENRA and IAEA, but we have to see both these organizations exist the whole time also until Fukushima. WENRA, for those who don't know, is the regulators, so we are still in a situation where the regulators regulate themselves. We also heard WANO, which is the operators. Operators will go on peer reviewing themselves in WANO. IAEA has been here. IAEA did not prevent Fukushima, and unless I'm heavily misinformed, which I don't think, they didn't change anything. And it's true, and I think this is the interesting point, and what we could have learned something if we want to, is that of course these missions, which we also learned already exist, they did see this. They told even the Japanese regulator knew about it, about all the deficits of Fukushima, but since everything is usually top secret and no one knows about it, and they even ignored court orders to close these plants down, Fukushima happened. So I didn't see that there would have been any answer found in the past 3 years, and this is also in the nuclear safety revision. We don't see too many new things. The only new thing, I think, to sum up would be the item of peer review, to which I will return later, because this is by no means agreed yet among member states, that there will be peer reviews. So I don't see that we would have industries or operators' responsibility increased to before Fukushima. But I found interesting that also Monsieur Poncelet thought that the peer reviews could contribute to more safety, which I also think, and I will return to this topic. Now I want to return to my presentation. So I don't want to repeat all of it. My time is running out. Trust, transparency, we need content on that. I always have the feeling I talk often on transparency and the question, what is it that civil society or the public wants? Of course we want to know, but there has to be also something to tell people. And as long as there is no progress in safety, we can't say by any magic means everything is okay. So I don't want to talk too much about this. And also coming back to the stress tests, I don't think that they prove that everything is fine with nuclear reactors all over Europe, plus the stress tests are not over yet. The phase of implementation in all the countries is by far not finished. Many countries have still analysis going on, and the implementation of measures is postponed up to 10 years into the future, which is really long. Because one of the most important topics in Europe is, of course, the aging plants. Most of those 130, 140 plants are older than 30 years or reaching end of lifetime. And I think this is the most important topic, where also no answers seem to be having found. Because to say that Venra wants for new nuclear power plants added safety, saying there has to be a safety case made against meltdown, that's really nice. But there is no new plants, and most likely there won't be. So we have to mostly discuss this extremely old fleet that we're having out here, and where obviously no one really believes that they should be phased out but us. So coming back to peer review, when I prepared this, I looked into the situation and found out that while there might be a little progress, we still have quite an iron curtain I had to see, because when I looked through documents and so on, I saw that the new EU member states still believe, for example, Bohunice, which is a VVR first generation, no containment, or the same Kosloduj in Bulgaria, but even Lithuania, who had RBMK, for those who don't remember anymore, this is Chernobyl type, which never been even designed for energy production, and they keep saying they had to close down these wonderfully safe plants only because of the political will of the European Union. So this is just a small example of safety culture, communication, and transparency. And I think as long as we stand here, it's really hard to say we made progress. So, and then I looked also into the current efforts and the discussions around the revision, and I found this one. This is a very interesting presentation from the Czech utility CEZ. It's in Czech, but I made a translation. You just have to wait to see this nice text. And there you see how it really works. It's the utilities saying what they want, which then turns into regulators' policy, who then tells the Prime Minister what to negotiate. You know, you could see this all the way up. It's now in the upper house of the Senate. And as they said at the end of their seminar, also the other Visegrad countries are following this policy, and we hope we can, so to speak, prevent the worst. And when you look at it, then you see it's those few little progresses which might have been made with this safety directive. Just quickly, it's of course a little problem with safety reports, but what's really nasty, of course, they think is participation of the public. I mean, it could complicate the licensing process. Aarhus Convention, another nasty word. It's the right of the people to information, access to courts, even participation. But this, of course, has to be really stopped. Another thing they really don't want to have in these safety reports, analyses of beyond design basis accident. What is this? This is severe accidents. Everyone knows there is severe accidents, but it used to be, for example, it still is actually normal practice to ignore their existence and to have environmental impact assessments. The only possibility for the public to get any kind of information, you could do it without severe accidents. You just said they don't happen. Sorry, I'm still speaking, or is this my misinterpretation of the situation?
No.
Okay, sorry, you can't wait. Okay, but I will finish, yeah? Thank you. So, also nasty periodic assessment of national frameworks. I don't know what's so problematic about it. And then what also seems to be not so popular is this 6-year review where the EU Commission and or the member states, there is some formula on that in the directive, could come up with a topic. Because there is always the rumor one day we could discuss what a containment is, and this could have to do with plants like Dukovany or Bohunice or Pakšice, this kind of generation. this, of course, has to be prevented. So that's how we see it, highest safety standards, highest efforts, highest safety culture in reality. I think we discussed this is enough. And yes, here I wanted to also come back to the proposal raised in the committee. Here is the practical elimination of occurrence of accident sequences, which would have large releases. Already the amendment in this committee, I don't understand why this has to be watered down. There is no reason for me. And also, so I really would recommend, of course, severely at least to keep what's here in this proposal, that the peer reviews should be conducted. Of course, they should be made completely transparent. I would recommend to also include independent experts and the NGOs, or otherwise we have a Fukushima effect. I mean, you can send, of course, tons of missions to Fukushima, and if they tell them that they don't believe in the safety case, the calculations, but no one finds out, then we stand where they were. So I think the only answer is, of course, more transparency. And as I already said, one thing we really have to be worried about is, of course, the lifetime extension. And there is this practice which we also saw with this VENRA. We have higher safety standards, but only for new plants. But the problem is we have around 140 old plants, and at least half of them are reaching end of design lifetime, and without further efforts, they just can't be prolonged. There is not even an environmental impact assessment. So this means just because there is a plant, it seems to have a birthright to going on forever, while, of course, new projects, whatever they are, not only nuclear, but also all other electricity generating capacities, you know, they have to be checked. Is there alternatives? What would other things cost? Public, environmental impact assessment, Aarhus Convention. No, a nuclear power plant is just prolonged. And we know the older they get, the more dangers there are. And let's not pretend that Fukushima was so different. It had only this periodic safety assessment done for 4 decades. Yeah, and soon after that, this triple meltdown happened. So instead of having less safety, I think we definitely need more safety. And I would really ask you also to think about the lifetime extensions, that they have to go through the same assessments like new power plants. I don't see why they have a right to standing there and being extremely dangerous and risky for the people living in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking obviously towards an interesting discussion.
Grazie. La parola.
Thank you. The next speaker, the last speaker, will be Gerhard Hennenhofer. Please go ahead.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak German. In the German Ministry of the Environment, I am responsible, or head of the department is responsible for nuclear safety. But as of next week, I won't be doing that anymore because of the political change in Germany. So today I'm speaking in my other capacity as the chair of ENSREG, which is the European regulatory body that deals with nuclear safety in conjunction with the European Commission. Europe's regulators have taken on the challenges of Fukushima. They have absorbed the shock and taken on the challenges. We have designed a European stress test and introduced it alongside our existing work on monitoring of reactors in Europe. That was additional work, extra work. 500 man-years went into this, and you know the results are Mr. Gariba just mentioned them. And we also decided in our role as European regulators to get involved in the debate on a new safety directive and to make an active contribution to that. Why? Well, we're directly concerned. Under the existing legislation in Europe, we are the people who are responsible for safety. And the regulators within the national states are responsible. So, you know, we are the people who will actually implement any directive in this area, and we think that we have the expertise to make proposals as to how we should organise our nuclear safety in Europe. This, after all, is about, you know, building the single European house in the area of nuclear safety. Now, when the first proposals were under discussion, one question that arose was, do we actually need a new nuclear safety directive in Europe at the moment? After all, we haven't even had a report on the existing directive. We have no experience with it. And there are concerns, there have been concerns and still are on the part of national regulators, especially in the small member states, that their personnel resources will simply not be sufficient to do this new job on top of the work they already have to do in their immediate vicinity to introduce European procedures. So we've agreed that a European directive must be judged on whether or not it brings any added value over and above the cooperation that's already been going on among our regulators in the context of the IAEA in Vienna. But for decades, we've been trying to achieve standardized nuclear safety and harmonized nuclear safety rules, and we think that we have to have an added value in any European legislation. Simply, it shouldn't just be a duplication of the Vienna system, and here I perhaps disagree with Mr. Poncelet from the industry. It should also be more ambitious. We are of the opinion that Europe should take the lead in nuclear safety and should not just adopt the lowest baseline standards of the IAEA. That's one place where we can bring added value and would like to bring added value. And the other is that we believe that the existing system, which we already have in the IAEA, the various missions that are involved in it, that we shouldn't just add to it, but we should add what is necessary to it, and this is our experience from the stress test. What is needed is a more in-depth discussion of technical issues so that mutual understanding can be improved among European regulators on the nuclear safety issues. Now, of course, we already have arrangements, we already have a European legal framework, but that lays the responsibility on the shoulders of the member states. So they can only come up with partial answers, and at the end of the day, it means that one country, one regulator has to rely on another. We want to change that. We want the directive for this day and age, and we want the national regulators to grow together by working with one another more. So there are two core issues as far as we're concerned. We don't want fixed standards as long as we know that they are only baseline standards. It's not just a question of making them better, but we do want to have ambitious targets here. So we need maximum flexibility, and that target is one that we can identify from our work and our cooperation in the existing organisation, and on the basis of what we regard as necessary for the new reactors in Europe. In other words, we want to pretty well eliminate accidents, and where accidents cannot be eliminated, those accidents that cannot be eliminated must be kept limited, or their effects must be kept restricted by new measures so that they're almost non-existent. And now on the new reactors, and this is my answer to my colleagues, on this target, we want to ensure that these targets for the new installations are the ones that we use to judge the existing installations, and as far as possible, we want to do this in the existing situation, and we want to ensure that existing reactors can be raised to meet the standards that apply to new reactors. And to check that, And to further develop it in the future, we have suggested topical peer reviews, as they're called, not the same as an overall inspection of a nuclear facility, but it is a review to ensure that certain specific topics, major topics like containment, fire safety, and so on, the main issues, the big issues, can be dealt with in greater depth so that we can develop a new and better awareness of safety among the regulators. Those are the core factors in our proposal. We are grateful to the Commission for responding positively to this proposal in its work. We've had an opportunity to discuss it with Commissioner Oettinger, and we're very pleased to see that the Commission proposal, to a great extent, reflects what is in our proposal. It's been taken on board to a great extent, and therefore we think that the Commission is on the right track. So alongside these two key issues, the safety target and the topical peer reviews, we also have other targets, of course, transparency and independence. On transparency, we've debated this at great length among the regulators, and we decided that given the different circumstances from one member state to the other, we don't need to set out all the details, but we have suggested that the regulators should develop a transparency strategy so that we can all follow the same line. Now, we've also discussed the issue of independence in great detail, and may I just say on that, that, you know, we get to hear very quickly about what happens in Japan. I was in a discussion this morning with a Japanese colleague in Paris. For him, it's not an institutional issue. It's an issue, a cultural issue, whether you have a culture of criticism, but of course the Japanese mentality is very different there. But on these issues, after lengthy debate among the regulators, we've come to the conclusion that it's not about separating institutions, it's about the decision-making process as such. That process must be independent of any non-relevant, any extraneous factors. Considerations that are based on energy policy or on promoting nuclear power. The key thing is the process, not what the institutions, what form the institutions should take. As we see it, those are the key points. And let me say once again, we're very pleased that the Commission has taken them on board. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you to all the speakers. Now, to organise the time we have left as best we can, I would suggest, well, could I ask you whether in addition to those people who have already asked to speak, and I'll read out their names in a moment, there are any others who wish to speak, because on that basis we can determine how long they have. I've got on the speaking list Ms. Jordan,
Zoc, Bezzina, Correira de Campos, Rubik, Tosenowski, Odi, Prodi e Rivasi. Allora, finché io faccio i conti perché...
So let's just calculate this out. But while I'm doing that, I'll give Ms. Jordan the floor because she's rapporteur for 5 minutes.
Hvala lepa.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank all the speakers at today's hearing. Thank you for joining us today. I got quite a large amount of time for my speech, but I will leave the main introduction out because I have a large amount of questions for the speakers. Firstly, I would like to say that I am fully behind the approach we've taken after the Fukushima accident in the European Union. I think the European Commission did a good job adding to the directive we had before. I believe that the new text has to offer an added value at European level. But I completely understand all those people who have comments and fears. Personally, I don't think that everything should be done at national level. We should take into account the potential at European level. And now to the questions. Mr. Poncelet, you said that we shouldn't rest on our laurels, that we have to make a step forward. You've also had some comments that you raised. What are the barriers preventing harmonization within the European Union? That's my question. And I would also like to know what you think about safety culture within the Union. We have many different levels, depending on the institutions, where we try to harmonize our legislation. But apparently, this safety culture is still quite differentiated. So we have a lot of work before us if we want to ensure full harmonization. Mr. Gariba from the European Commission, we've heard a lot about all the things that regulators as well as operators, license holders have to do. There's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy that has to be reduced. So my question is the following. What are the ambitions? How are we to achieve more synergy? How to reduce red tape both at IAEA level as well as European institution level? Then I have a question for Mr. Hennehofer, who spoke in the name of regulators. Why are you against giving the European Commission certain tasks? Well, I believe that the European Commission shouldn't have their hands in content, because that is something that national regulators have to talk about. But I don't think that it would be a big problem if the European Commission would regulate the implementation part of the peer reviews, would try to harmonize implementation. What happens if there is no agreement at national level between member states? If people can't agree on topical peer reviews? I think it would be a fine thing to do to have a plan B, and that's the European Commission. Also, you said that one of the important goals for you, and you talked about it in some length, I think, is to, I apologize, I just have to find this comment, to put an end to all accidents. But if accidents happen, we have to ensure that we're very well prepared to mitigate them. But how are we to do that with European legislation? Or do you think that we shouldn't strive to do that at European level? Now questions for Ms. Lawrence from Friends of the Earth. I have the following question for you. You were quite skeptical in your presentation, and I would like to know the following. In which case could we say that according to this legislation, according to these rules, we trust you? We trust that nuclear energy will be used safely. I will end in just a minute. Quickly, Mr. Ambrosini, I know that well-educated employees are of prime importance. You talked about the time after 2020. And this is not only a task for experts, but also politics. So what do you think politics and politicians should do? And of course, I don't think money is the main issue. Thank you.
Thank you. If people take too much time, of course, we might manage to finish our work. So 3 minutes to each of the speakers, and we'll start with Ms. Herzog.
Thank you, Chairman. Probably I would not need 3 minutes to ask my question. I think it's very, very important that we discuss the subject. I think it's a natural consequence of our work and the Commission work of the stress test. And definitely what we learned during the stress test, I think, is enough reason to go and look how we can improve the situation. In this room, it's not a secret that I was always standing for nuclear, and I always had an opinion that it's not the nuclear energy what is dangerous. It's the people who use are the dangerous one, the people who make a mistake, the human responsibility. So nuclear safety has a human face in any level. And here my question comes. In the recent developments of my country has shown that while the professional management of the nuclear can be on the top and developed a lot and was discussed a lot during the stress test, not the same thing happened to the political decision-making process within the member states. As the energy mix choice is the member states' responsibility, the political decision-making process is a national member state responsibility. But what if those people do mistakes, or what if those people unilaterally introduce measures which are not agreed by the society and which can bring higher risk? How we manage those kind of safety risks which are on that level? And I would very much argue if the Commission wished to interfere in the future on the professional matters, because I do not believe that the European Commission can have a deep technical, technological knowledge which goes beyond and can be a kind of dispute settlement system for the authorities. But I very much believe that they have a right to say, or if they should have the right to say, best to mention, that they can influence the national member states' political decision-making level. What would be your criteria, for instance, that the authorities in the certain member states still independent? How you can secure that the government has not a superior influence of them? How you can make sure that the party membership is not better count than the nuclear knowledge in this case? How you can secure that the financial risk we take, it will not go against the security? I do not know any nuclear facility in Europe which has built in time. Therefore, if the political decision-making process, due to urgency and lack of national budget, makes a compromise on safety, who will make a say on this? The authorities definitely not. Will the European Commission? Are you ready for the job? Are you planning something to put into this directive? I think that the recent development in my own country has shown that there is a need to act here. What are your plans, Mr. Commission?
Collega Bezzina, prego.
Děkuji za slovo. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to pose a question to Madame Patricia Lorenz, who spoke about ČEZ, the company in the Czech Republic. I think that her slide was taken out of the context of the whole presentation. And I think this doesn't provide a good picture about how the company takes care of the safety issues. We have two plants, Dukovany and Temelin, and they scored quite well in the stress test. So my explanation would be that your criticism would be directed towards those who scored much worse. Now, about the European public. The public in my country is supportive of nuclear energy, and probably the people would not agree with many of what you've said. I have a question to the European Commission. I agree with Madame Lawrence where she calls for more transparency and more trust. The company that was criticized here has never omitted providing information about anything that happens in their facilities. Every small accident is reported in a pretty transparent manner. But as far as the peer review goes, my question to Mr. Gariba, can you imagine a really fair peer review between a country who has nuclear power plants and between a country where nuclear energy is banned by the constitution? Can you filter out the political aspects from the expert aspects? I would say my opinion is that here is really the correct role for the national regulator, because I really can't imagine how the Commission could be completely independent. Where transparency is in question, where the roles of national operators are concerned, I am in favour, fully in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Correa de Campos.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much to the speakers on this panel. Very useful information. Now, we fully understand that the proposals contained within this draft directive meet point by point those questions raised after Fukushima. The regulators, stress tests, transparency, closing loopholes when it comes to assessment and risk assessment, up-to-date scientific information for risk assessment, self-assessment, peer reviews, trying to avoid explosions resulting from an excess of hydrogen that we saw in Fukushima. Well, this is all well and good. It's very hard indeed to speak out against this draft directive. It gathers together all the experience we gained after Fukushima, and that's all well and good. But it's not a question of accepting or rejecting the directive. The question is, will this directive be effective quickly enough? Will it be enough to respond to the problems identified? And here, starting with the Parliament, and I think it's the same thing at the Council, we're strongly divided when it comes to nuclear energy. There's a real gulf between the two sides, especially when it comes to a geographic spread. At the same time, we are prevented from legislating on a more drastic to a more drastic extent. Why isn't this a regulation? Well, because it will be rejected by the Council, citing an issue of the principle of subsidiarity. So we're very limited indeed when it comes to negotiating and improving the situation. Of course, there are issues related to subsidiarity. Fair enough, but that doesn't mean we can't discuss the topic. It's all well and good saying that a certain member state has a problem, they're responsible for the consequence. It doesn't work like this. If the directive if this directive means we take a few steps forward here in this area, I think that would be a great progress. Of course, this could lay the groundwork for new reactors in Europe. I'm not against flexibility when it comes to the guidelines and standards, but this proposal may well be heading in the right direction, but it is going very slowly indeed. And are we going to achieve what we want in time? When I say in time, I mean before Fukushima, I went to Japan. I went before and I went after with Paolo Rubik, who's here with us as well. And the year before the incident in Fukushima, Paolo Rubik spoke on behalf of the STOA committee but found it very hard to make his voice heard because the rest of the table was against any criticism of nuclear energy. But the next year, after the explosion, everybody around the table throwing their hands up in the air, saying, "This is the end. This is the end of nuclear. What are we going to do now?" In last September, I was there again, and the situation was somewhat normal again. But Pastor Paolo can talk about this in more depth. I'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rubik.
Yes. Ich bin überzeugt davon, dass das nicht Nuklearstrom ist.
Well, you can see that this room isn't powered by a nuclear, I don't think. But I would like to thank my colleague, comments off mic. I'd like to thank my colleague Carrera de Campos for his words. It is important for us to say repeatedly that we need a safety culture here in the nuclear area. It's a global challenge. It isn't limited by national borders, and this has been shown by Fukushima. The results and consequences of this were felt worldwide, much like with Chernobyl. Therefore, the EU is necessary. We need to act in accordance with the principle of consensus. And we need to make progress. That's clear. Therefore, I think that we should take a look at best practice, which regulatory oversight bodies in Europe are in the best position to act. I think that the French authorities are really independent authorities. There isn't a political influence here. They're a good example. So they have the ability to take decisions, and this practice should be spread elsewhere. I think, however, the 3-year period is a bit long, and a shorter period would be better. 3-year reviews are useful, but transparency is more so. And there can be no question here about this. Transparency is very important. Therefore, I'm delighted to see that the Commission's draft proposal contains this. And the European Parliament has initiatives which have been discussed in this House. I think we're taking a few steps closer to improving the energy situation in Europe. We should be able to achieve a situation which benefits our citizens in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Prodi. Thank you. Sorry that I wasn't able to arrive in time to hear all the speakers. So I'll be really just making some general points based also on the debate we've had. First of all, we must see the nuclear issue as a whole and bear in mind the original sin, if you like, in that industry. We need to think through this system, because I myself would be willing to have nuclear reactors producing energy only if that helps nuclear disarmament. We've just seen the end of an agreement between the US and Russia to decommission nuclear weapon-grade uranium, uranium-250, to produce energy. So I think if we can do more of this, then it could be justified perhaps by the reduction of the risk of nuclear warfare. If we could, it might help to offset the risks involved in using nuclear power for energy. Of course, there's still the problem of waste, which is kind of being, we can't really allow ourselves to just pass this on to future generations like that. A nuclear industry, a nuclear problem is a Europe-wide problem because the area that could be affected by any nuclear accident is continent-wide. So we did European agreements, despite the historic difficulties arising out of the fact that there are 2 member states which are nuclear powers, as they're called. We, therefore, I think, must have a Euratom agreement that is balanced, that is not distorted, because France and the UK have nuclear weapons. And this, I think, is very important for the peaceful use of nuclear power in Europe. I think that's what we must do first and foremost, look into our own consciences and get away from habit. That is what lay behind both Chernobyl and Fukushima. Thank you, Mr. Zanowski.
Děkuji, paní předsedkyně, za slovo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree very much with this hearing, and I'm very glad that so many panelists have been invited. I think that we should underline especially transparency and transparency in the field of nuclear safety. And I think that we should organize more of workshops like this, because I'm afraid that in Europe these discussions are rather polarized. Sometimes there are only 2 parts of people. One group is totally against and the second group is totally for. So very often the discussion is rather violent. In my opinion, nuclear safety needs a lot of discussions which are led in an open way. And I would like to thank you for organizing this hearing. Regarding this new revised directive, I agree that it is important to ensure safety of nuclear power plants, and I also agree with the fact that there must be responsibility of national regulators, and that national regulators should be totally independent of politics and of other businesses. Nuclear safety must be based on trust of people. People must know that people who work for these installations are experts. I would like to have 2 questions. The first is for Mr. Hennenhofer and the second is for Mr. Gariba. I would like to have a question on stress tests. In my opinion, when talking about stress test, I think that there are different approaches of regulatory bodies. Mr. Henenhofer was talking about Fukushima. He said that the company had a special culture, special historical background regarding the safety approach. I think that the situation with European regulatory bodies is different, and I think that's good news. I have a question for Mr. Henenhofer. This new directive presents new definitions and new conceptions. The directive tries to formulate very precise definitions so that they are not misinterpreted, because this is very important during assessments and during reviews. It's important to have clear definitions. So do you think that the directive is clear enough in definitions? And another question for Mr. Henenhofer. I was a shadow reporter for this issue. I'm not sure about the position of the European Commission, both now and in future. Some colleagues have already stated that it is very difficult to discuss certain technical aspects with regulatory bodies. So what, in your opinion, is going to be the role of the European Commission in future in these discussions? Because those discussions are very difficult, very complex. All regulatory bodies are very good in technical issues. Thank you.
Rivasi, prego.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman, and thanks to you for organising this meeting. I've got a number of questions, really. I'm a little bit surprised regarding the scope of the directive, first of all, because it's a directive which is very much focusing on the reactors, but not on nuclear facilities, the installations themselves. You talk about containment, but you've got also the treatment facilities and installations, and then you've got the enriching installations, and then all of the pools which are located next to the nuclear power stations for the cooling process, for the spent fuel rods and so on. So I think it's important to talk about all of these things. Now, on safety, I would agree with the Commission that we need to strengthen independence. And there's one aspect here which is very important, which is that the authorities should not be answerable or dependent on ministries. And we see very often in member states that these authorities are actually answerable to different ministries, defence, interior and so on. But they should be separated from them. Then we also need to strengthen the sanction scales. Because at the moment, as a French MEP, I can see that when it comes to the Nuclear Safety Authority, very often they're able to halt the work of a reactor, but that's an extreme case. But they actually have to introduce daily sanctions. So if they send out recommendations vis-à-vis the operators, then they say, you know, this is going to cost you this much because you haven't carried out the necessary reparations and so on. Because you'll have good regulation in terms of security and safety if you've got proper sanctions in place so that the operators actually have full respect for them. Now, on the new power stations, I heard from my colleague from Hungary, in terms of what she said, that regarding PETCH in Hungary, I just wanted to know the following. Are they actually going to respect the state rules, state aid rules? There shouldn't be any hidden subsidies here for these two reactors. We had the same problem with Hinkley Point in the UK, for example. I'd like to know, you know, if these discussions are underway already, but it might be interesting to know whether or not there are going to be calls for tender, for example. I think in the directive it says that you have to have reactors that will be able to ensure that there won't be radioactive contamination if there is an accident which occurred. So what can the Commission do in this circumstance? Now, on peer review, I think this is a very good thing. And innovative, because now we're going to have different thematic subjects which will be discussed at the level of the regulators in each of the member states, and obviously we have to follow that up. But what about the role of the Commission in all of this? Because if you have two member states where the peer review has taken place on an issue like fire, for instance, and where the member states haven't actually acted on the requests that came through from the regulatory authorities, I mean, how can you get one member state forcing another member state to do that? You know, you've got two avenues, basically. You either say there has to be complete transparency in the reporting, and then the NGOs can get involved and get the information. For example, we'll look at the case of Transparency Watch that we created with Onkli and other NGOs at European level. And here, can the Commission not play a role, I wonder? Can the Commission not start saying, there was a peer review, everybody agreed on everything, but then there are certain member states that didn't act on the things that needed to be done? So that's a question for the Commission. And then as regards Mr. Ambrosini, on subcontracting, I live in a country where there are an awful lot of nuclear power plants, but there are 7 to 8 levels of outsourcing now. And what's your opinion on that? As MEPs, we asked that for there to be at least 3 of those levels of subcontracting removed, and even if it's the responsibility of the operator to provide information on this, I'd like to have your view on it anyway, because Fukushima, taught us that subcontractors were sought out to find the answers regarding the pump problems and other problems too, and I think they raise real concerns in terms of safety.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thanks very much, Madam Chairman. I too would like to thank you for the organisation of this hearing, and I'm very much in admiration of our colleague Romana for the work that she has done in this area. Ms. Lawrence, you said earlier on that you represented citizens, but you don't represent them. You actually represent your members. The people who represent the people of Europe, the real citizens of Europe, is us as MEPs. But where you are right is that there is a problem in terms of transparency, I would say. And there's a problem here that we're not going to solve today, but it concerns the communitarisation of the Euratom Treaty, because we're going to have to solve this one day. I'm in favour of nuclear power, but I don't think it can in the long term continue to exist without having real in-depth public debate on this. I'd also like to congratulate Council, Commission and Member States in terms of everything that they've done after the tragic events of Fukushima. Now, on decommissioning, I'm happy that this word is now in the directive, because that means that when it comes to nuclear installations and so on, there is the possibility of decommissioning old installations and facilities and move towards new ones. And in my member state, France, for example, a decision has been taken to decommission certain nuclear installations, and they've now started manufacturing 3rd and 4th generation facilities, which is very good. On decommissioning, perhaps in this directive we could envisage factoring in the idea that the operators have to come up with accounting practices to make sure they have money in reserve for decommissioning of all installations to take place, so that the resources are available at the end of the life cycle of the installations for this decommissioning to take place. And perhaps we could also force the operators, and this in the interests of covering the whole cost of running installations, to also cover or have some sort of insurance policy or their own funds to cover costs that may emerge if, unfortunately, there is an accident. Now, we are assured by industry that all costs for operations and running of nuclear power plants are covered by the operators, so that if there is an incident, the citizens will not have to both pay for the damage of the incident and then through their tax contributions also then have to actually cover the costs of the incident as well. That should be something that we tackle.
Thank you. That concludes the list of speakers among the MEP speakers. And now I think we can give 5 minutes to each of our panellists to respond to all the questions. And we'll start with Mr. Gariba.
Grazie Presidente. I would like to go straight to the questions that were asked to the Commission and try to reply to all of them in the order that I got them. From the rapporteur, what are the ambitions? The ambition is clear. We want to have Europe as the most advanced continent in terms of nuclear safety. And this is why we have proposed the highest level of objectives for the safety of all the installations. I start to reply perhaps to other questions, not only to nuclear power plants. The directive covers all installations. How do we reduce the red tape? I think that the approach of having safety objectives and not repeating at the European level norms which are at the IAEA level is an avoidance of duplication which allows to reduce the red tape in itself. To Madame Herzog, how do you make regulators independent? Well, in the 2009 directive, we had a notion which is the functional independence of the regulator. In Article 5 of the proposal of the Commission, you have criteria that go from A to G that detail how this independence is articulated in terms of human, financial resources, in terms of avoidance of conflict of interest, etc., etc. So I think that this represents a clear step forward. Now, how can you ensure that this is implemented? Well, first of all, you have to have it in law, and then you have to verify that the law is actually abided by the governments and implemented by the courts. This is how our system works. To Mr. Brezina, you were asking how can you imagine a fair peer reviews with non- and non-nuclear countries. I think that you had a very clear example with the nuclear stress tests. We don't need to go very far from there, where you had all the 27 member states participating, and I think reaching very balanced and coherent conclusions. So the model that is proposed in the directive does not go far from there. Do we need to do the peer reviews at shorter intervals? Maybe, but I think that we need to have a balance between the normal everyday work of the regulators that don't have always to peer review, but also to check the safety of the installations and the international work. So we believe that the 6 years period is a reasonable compromise between these two things. Madame Rivasi, about installations versus reactors, I think that I have replied to you. I invite you to look at the definition of nuclear installation in the directive, and also to look at the fact that Article 8A of the proposal talks about everywhere nuclear installations. So there are only some specifics in the Commission proposal that go further in asking specific criteria for nuclear reactors when there are these specificities. But nuclear installations are fully covered in the provisions. When you talk about reinforcing sanctions, I also invite you to look at Article 9A, penalties, of the proposal of the Commission, where we put forward a proposal for having effective, proportionate and dissuasive measures that have to be applied by the national regulator. So I believe that your point is well taken into account. Now, the question of PACs, I think, goes a little bit farther from this debate. What I can say is that the Hungarian authorities have notified a draft agreement to the European Commission, and this is being subject to examination there. But I cannot go further than this, at least in this context, in talking about it. Peer review and total transparency. I think that in the stress test we had total transparency. If you go to the NSREG website, you will see that all the reports of all the installations, all the reports at national levels, and all the reports of the peer reviews were all published, and they are all available in there. And I believe that if we have the system of topical peer reviews as proposed by the Commission, we will indeed endeavour, at least from the Commission side, to obtain the same level of transparency. And last point, sorry, I take 2 seconds more to reply to Mr. Rodi on the questions of the commissioning. The commissioning was already included in the 2009 directive, so it is not a new thing. It is quite clear that the commissioning is a full part of the life cycle of a nuclear installation, and therefore the safety of the operations is of fundamental importance. As far as financing of it, let me recall that there is a 2006 recommendation from the Commission that is regularly monitored and is subject to a report to the European Parliament, which examines the level of provisions that nuclear operators have throughout Europe. So I think that this with double system of including the safety in the directive plus the reporting in this recommendation, the subject is quite covered for the moment. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Ponsley.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais répondre dans ma...
Thank you very much. I'll speak my mother tongue, if I may. Well, I've been asked for my opinion in terms of obstacles to harmonisation that might take place in the European Union, and the idea of lack of homogeneity in terms of the culture of safety found in the different countries. Well, we can't ignore history, and if we look at EU countries, national steps have prevailed when people thought about designing and building and running nuclear power plants within the European Union. And in that context, obviously, calculations may have differed from one country to the next. And then the size of nuclear power plant parks are also very different in member states. Then you've got industrial design and experience, which differs too. So that has meant that there aren't real standards, as it were, uniform standards in nuclear reactors. There might be similar techniques and so on. But I think in terms of the national regulators, well, they've all drawn on the big principles available, particularly those drafted by the Nuclear Atomic or National Atomic Agency, and that's why the peer review is so important, because it has allowed an exchange of experience between countries. But that applies for the older reactors, which are still up and running today. But when it comes to the new reactors, well, I don't think we can criticise industry. They've tried to anticipate things. If you look at the UPR technology, well, that was something that was drafted and designed with multiple regulators across borders together. So I think from the design stage there has been cooperation between member states, and that's good. And I'd like to take this opportunity today to say that for the part of industry we have actually proposed an idea which is known as the ERDA idea, and that speaks in favour of more cooperation and coordination for the new reactors. Now, obviously, we've submitted it for the attention of the Commission and the regulators, and we really want it to be looked into, and hopefully it will be implemented as an idea in the future. So you've got to look at the past. That explains the present. But I don't think we can argue that there is a lack of homogeneity. I think we are actually moving towards more and more harmonisation. Last point now, it's really a question of principle. Our rule is a very simple one. Industry applies the rules in place. Now, who makes the rules? Well, up until now, it was actually the member states who were competent for making the rules, and each of the member states, the operators, then apply the rules that exist and actually respond to the demands of the national regulators. Now, if in the future, tomorrow or whatever, the member states, the Commission, or the EU or legislators in the EU decide that things will run differently, then of course we will have to follow the new rules. But we don't want to be taken hostage, as it were, stuck between competing rules and competing demands from different regulators. If you look at aviation safety, you've got one aviation controller, and you don't put pilots in difficult positions by giving them contradictory instructions. So, the rules have to be clear and consistent, and the people responsible for them have to say there is one single interlocutor who has the responsibility and the right and the duty to review and even halt the activities of nuclear power plants if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Walter Ambrosini.
A couple of questions. One of them was from Mrs. Jordan was what the politicians should do for education. So, first of all, let's say the answer is may look somehow trivial, which is favoring education, let's say in any time, which is the idea. The nuclear field is very much sensitive to political changes in attitudes and so on. And it may happen that if you don't support it, let's say, enough during the periods in which nuclear is not, very much popular, like in the post-Fukushima, you waste a lot of the efforts that have been made in the past in order to construct an educational system. If we want to quantify, let's say, what is the time which is needed in order to set up good courses at university level, good training courses and so on, we can measure it in terms of decades. So the idea is that volatility of policies, especially at the national level, because let's say at the European level I see greater stability, to tell the truth, but at the national level is very, very dangerous. It is the best way to not to have safety, to avoid that people is properly educated in, let's say, nuclear matters. And educating in nuclear matters is a duty, in my opinion, that at, let's say, a European level, which is due to the fact that we have plants, that we have to decommission them, to build new ones. We have, let's say, medical, application of radiation and so on. So from, let's say, politicians, in my opinion, we expect long-sighted decision and stable ones. This is the point. If every time that there is a nuclear accident somewhere in the world, you put into question all the technology, let's say, there is something which is due in that field, which means that every time that a plane crashes, there is a commission which is in charge of looking what are the, let's say, the reasons for that, and having a feedback on the technology as well. And of course in the nuclear field is even higher, this need, and it is done. But let's say the popularity that nuclear, let's say, is losing because of that is acting against safety, because it is actually acting against the progress, for instance, in education, the good programs that are, let's say, set up. So this is something that must be clearly said to politicians, in particular, let's say, at the national level. We need stability and alongside these decisions if we want really to maintain an educational system which favors safety. Then a second question was about subcontracting, if I perceived it correctly. Of course, let's say there are different levels of subcontracting in, let's say, building complex plants like the nuclear power plants. And of course, it is necessary that at any level of subcontracting, there is awareness about, let's say, the role that nuclear safety must have in each one of the operations, let's say, in a gradual way, of course, from the plant operator to the last provider, let's say. But, let's say, a principle of nuclear safety culture is that it must pervade everything. I mean, all the operations, all the operators, from the last one to the first one. So that's why we need good training courses. If someone is working, let's say, in the nuclear field, must be aware of the consequence of failures, of near misses or misses and so on. And this is one of the principles of nuclear safety culture. So absolutely I agree. And this comes back to the point of reinforces education, let's say, even for those who are making some work in the nuclear field which may be relevant to safety.
Grazie.
Thank you. Patricia Lorenz.
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to put this into groups, the questions. So one was a bit about trust. When would be we as a civil society think that we can trust in safety? So, but I think there is another question hiding behind it. So first I would like to say we know, everyone knows, even industry admits and the regulators, it's residual risk. And I don't see any reason why we should live with it. There seems to be a kind of taboo to think that ever a nuclear power plant could be turned off, or eventually all of them. So I would like to say we don't have to, so to speak, be happy that there is always a little progress made or not. We can simply say this is too much risk, we don't live with it, and we know there's other possibilities of energy supply. I would like to say this because it's important to have a whole picture. Yes, but of course the question of trust and transparency, as I said also before, at least we would like to see an attempt to make it possible. But when we say from the very beginning of the stress tests to include also independent experts and not always have industry and regulators regulate themselves for a change, just nothing happens, not even a reaction, then of course there is no reason to increase trust, and I mean I think that's seen in every day that it is the case. Also what I think a question also from you or a comment, I think there is a big question, of course, between putting out a report where there is numbers and figures of accidents which happened and saying, that's it, public, and now please be happy, and now you've been transparented. I think it doesn't work like that, and that's why it was so important to see also the mentioning from this seminar of the Czech utility. A problem they see is, of course, the Aarhus Convention. And there, if you really look into it, is the big difference between we put out a report, whether it's stress tests or the assessments, and the possibility to be informed, to ask questions, to participate in the end on decision taking. And this is, of course, a completely different dimension. And before I finish off the topic of the Aarhus Convention, I also would like to remind everyone that all member states signed the Aarhus Convention, and also the EU treaty, but Euratom did not. So we could also ask why not. Perhaps I also may ask a question, perhaps Monsieur Garibat, will this day come when Euratom will sign the Aarhus Convention? Because then we would have a right to transparency, and the whole discussion, of course, would change. But for some reason, it seems not possible that Euratom also signs and ratifies the Aarhus Convention, although all member states, also Euratom, did that. This is a big a room of legal unclarity completely. Why, and a little bit I also would like to reflect in my last minutes on this question of why and how there would be fairness if nuclear states and non-nuclear states have to cooperate and inspect each other. I think that's what the member of this parliament, Mr. Prodi, said. I mean, the accidents are Europe-wide, so to say this is our plan and if it blows up, you're on the other side of the borders is not really helpful. Yes, I also share the view that, and this little suspicion that the Member of Parliament, Mr. Odi, had in the end. I think also that the ways of accounting for the money and the decommissioning funds are not, they do exist, there is a directive on it, but we made a study on this. Due to the accounting methods used, we don't think there is enough money in this, and this is of differing between countries, so it's a very important topic. And also, in short, the other question, if an accident happens, as we saw also at the conference here in Brussels a few weeks ago, in the end, yes, it's the public, it's the state who also pays for it, because the existing liability system, the way it is set up, does not provide compensation. And we see this every day, of course, in Japan, when we read again that TEPCO had to be bought out and the compensations are paid by the state. This was actually admitted also. This would be valid for Europe as well, and since I have half a minute, I enjoy myself and talk about Dukovany and Temelin and how nicely they passed the stress test. I don't think so, because in the follow-up now they started constructing additional reserve, super small cooling towers, because it proved that in the seismic event that seems to be relevant even in the safety case recognized by the Czech Republic, the existing cooling towers would crumble. And this is, as we know, quite a problem. Yes. That's total nonsense. Yes, you have small cooling towers that are now being built. It's really interesting to see this. There is pictures on it on the internet. This is smaller cooling towers next to the big ones. So it's nice they do it, but I would not say that this means this was a really good stress test result. Let's be happy to do this. Thank you very much.
Bene, la parola.
Thank you. And now for the last speaker, Mr. Hennenhofer.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Now the rapporteur, Madam Jordan, asked me what us as regulators have against the Commission. And my answer is, well, nothing at all. We work very closely together with them in ENSREG, and we hope to continue doing so in the future. The fact that the Commission has no key role here to play in regulation of nuclear safety is just a consequence of how legislation stands. It's a political exercise which must be decided on by governments, and as a representative of regulators, I shouldn't really speak at any more length about this. Now, what we want is for responsibility to be split. We don't want people to be palming off responsibility on other people, however. This is where the issue of peer reviews come into question, to ensure that we have a European-wide quality assessment set of criteria. We are convinced that the European Commission today does not have the wide-ranging experience necessary in order to ensure and assess security and safety. With apologies to Mr. Gariba, that is what I and all my colleagues believe. We think that we can work together with towards a peer review system, and we'll be able to set up a new regulatory body in the future that will have the necessary expertise. We adhere to a bottom-up approach using national regulatory authorities rather than a top-down approach with the Commission at the top. You also asked how regulators can be appointed. Now, this stands as one of our goals, but these have to be transposed into national legislation. This will be checked in topical peer reviews and in other reviews as well. There are periodic reviews every 10 years where European regulators themselves will be reviewed. And there will be checks and controls during these reviews as well. I was also asked, what about the decision-making bodies, regulatory decision-making? Now, I think that peer reviews would be able to identify problems in the decision-making and mistakes in decision-making as well. And naturally, mistakes happen, however. I was also asked about definitions, whether they are detailed enough, if I fully understood the question. In our work in the Council Working Group, but this was looked at in great detail. There is a problem with definitions drawn up by experts for experts? Or are these definitions which are drawn up by experts for legal experts? Because in a legally binding document, such as a directive, definitions have to take such a form that they can be used by legal experts. Then something about independence. It has been said that regulatory authority should be independent of government. Now, in Germany, I am a member of the government, and unfortunately, because of political changes, I have to leave my post, but I'm also a member part of NSREG. Now, you may well say that we should be completely independent, but look at, well, I might be being provocative here, but look at having military safety, for example. No one suggests that we have a completely independent military when it comes to the separation of military and the government. So yes, there should be a degree of separation between regulatory authorities and the government. Yes, that goes without saying. We have to ensure that there's no influence in terms of economics from the government, but we mustn't go further than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panellists. Ms. Herzog wants to state a view here. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just asked the question that can the Commission see that with the new safety directive we have a chance that the Commission can become a kind of dispute settlement system if the Member States' legislative branches do not behave, or it's only the infringement procedure afterwards. So can we have a dispute settlement kind of proactive thing? And can we have the politicians teach? Yeah, because if the politicians are totally energy and nuclear illiterate, then to give them the full responsibility with no control mechanism, with the unilateral decision, is just a risk on its own.
Mr. Gariba didn't answer that question, so please go ahead.
I can answer you in two ways. The first one is that, as you are perfectly aware, the Commission has the legal means, as you mentioned yourself, to pursue infringements if the law is not properly transposed, and this is an a posteriori work. However, there is something more. I think that since 2007, when we have established, for example, NSREC, and we discuss continuously with the regulators, and we observe how the regulatory systems in the different countries work, we have a tool which we can also proactively use. This is not a regulatory tool, of course. This is a tool in which we can discuss, observe, and maybe even prevent problems to happen. However, the only means, and I can only say that, the only means that at the end of the day the Commission has to impose onto a government to correct a bad implementation of the directive is to open an infringement procedure and ask the European Court of Justice to state as to whether the Commission position is correct. This is as far as we can go. I don't think that I can reply to you in any other way on this.
Bene.
So, thank you.
Everybody has a freedom of speech. We have a big freedom talking even about nonsenses. In this case of Temelin, I have a question for Mr. Hennenhofer. Please, you are regulator in neighboring country, Germany, and you are responsible for your nuclear plants. Are these measures offered by Czech regulator and operator based on professional level, and are they on the process of consultation with experts in the field through Europe, or is it really nothing like was presented by Mrs. Lawrence. Everybody can speak in circles about the same. I have heard it even from Commissioner, but I have read a report concerning these two nuclear power plants, and everybody is repeating Temelin, Temelin. That's crazy.
Ja, ich muss darauf hinweisen.
I have to say that we have an important principle in Europe. Every national authority speaks for those matters which they are nationally responsible for. We cannot speak about situations in other member states. For that reason, I am unable to answer your question, however much I may have liked to. But I can say that we have drawn up common stress test reports. We have a bilateral Czech-German commission. There are common papers which will explain how the situation between the two countries has been assessed. And as far as I can say at the moment, there is no real danger arising from the situation as it stands, according to these joint papers.
Right. Thank you. Ms. Jordan, you have 3 minutes to conclude.
Well, I don't really need 3 minutes. I would like to thank all the speakers for a very interesting debate. Also, thank my colleagues. Some of the questions were answered in a very open way, others in a less open way, but this gives us an insight into the area. I think the most important thing is, and that's something that connects us, is our wish that nuclear power plants would work at a very high level and would respect a high level of safety. I hope the European Commission will adopt an ambitious, effective instrument that will not hinder anyone's work, that will ensure safety, so that people will able to trust it too. Thank you.
Bene, ringrazio.
Fine, thank you to the panellists for being with us and for the quality of the debate. May I, however, remind my colleagues that at 5:30 we will have a coordinators meeting just for all parties concerned. For everyone else, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock when the committee will reconvene. Thank you.
Jordan?
Can we start maybe a little bit earlier with our meeting, coordinators meeting? No?
Avevamo provato.
We tried to do it at 5 o'clock. Some people were able to, but Mr. Turmes was not. So we'll have to wait until 5:30.